Welcome back to Make a Ranch. Today's question is, does it still make sense to learn how to use CAD? Now, for those of you that don't know, CAD used to stand for computer-aided drafting, but has since sort of become more known as computer-aided design. These days, it typically means like 3D modeling tools where you can model something in the computer that you can then 3D print, or you just use it in the case of architecture. You use those 3D models to export 2D drawings that become the blueprints or the house plans or construction plans for the building itself. So CAD right now still plays a big role in the design world. Anything that's going into factory production or anything that's going into the built environment in terms of architecture and engineering goes through CAD. Very, very few people, less than 1%, are still drawing things by hand and submitting blueprints where they actually photocopy the hand drawings and then submit those to the building departments and all those things. Almost everything from an architecture standpoint ends up as a PDF that gets submitted or printed or used in a construction site to follow along. So I think this question comes about because people are wondering, with AI, do we still need to learn how to use these really complex and sometimes kind of tedious 3D modeling softwares or CAD systems? I'm sure there's a lot of people on the internet saying things like, architects are so cooked because this new AI thing is going to do everything with just sort of voice to prompt. I'm not so sure about that. I think AI will change that, but if I look back at history, I don't think it's going to be as dramatic as what some of these people are predicting. So in short, it's always good to learn things if you're really interested in learning them. So I think the question today we're going to focus on, does it make sense to learn if you're a student, or does it make sense to learn if you're a young professional? And I would think of this as about investing. To learn new CAD software takes an investment of your time. And I think what the heart of this question is the investment today, in light of what might be coming from an innovation standpoint, worth it? Is it worth the hours I put in now to learn software? So like all investments, you can't be certain. There's always risk. If there wasn't any risk, everyone would just be doing it because it's a sure thing to make money and improve your career. So risk isn't all bad, but we want to focus on good risk. I would argue, if we were to look at previous examples, is when Photoshop came out, right? I'm sure some people said, oh, well, now you can just fix the photo afterwards. It makes no sense to learn photography. You can just shoot anything and then fix it all in post digitally. Not exactly true. Still, photography has changed because of the software at the endpoint, but it's still valuable to learn how to have the skills of a photographer. Conversely, bread machines have been around a while. I don't really think that too many bakers are worried about those, at least at the sort of high-end level where it's handcrafted and really focusing on quality. When I was in college around 2004, 2005, CAD still normally referred to two-dimensional things like AutoCAD, where you would draw lines in 2D to be the actual plans and sections of the building. At that time, Revit, also owned by Autodesk, same company because they acquired them, was introducing a 3D interface. And there was a similar type of debate, and people were saying, oh, you're not going to need to know how to do 2D drawings anymore. Well, no, you still have to know how to do 2D drawings. You just start with the 3D first typically, and then export 2D drawings, but you still need to edit those and refine those details. There's still that role for 2D drawings, even though the primary interface is now 3D. I think there's still a role to learn all sorts of design software, even if things get automated and you can do them approximately with sort of voice prompted or text prompted commands in a AI or a large language model. The reason why is because you typically don't get hired as a designer to just generate imprecise imagery. What you typically get hired for is to define the direction creatively with imprecise imagery, but then refine that into technical drawings that can actually inform how the object, furniture, or building is constructed. And that kind of precision and the ability to be specific still requires a lot of manual editing. So even if you use AI to sort of generate the rough form of a building and produce renderings that sell the client, you still have to give precise, detailed plans to the building department, to the builder, right? So it's like, even if you could use AI to write the book, you're still going to have to edit and make sure that it's actually what you want to submit to the publisher. So even if you take the most generous outlook of generative AI and being like, it's going to be able to do 90% of it right away, right up front, there's still going to be a lot of editing and refinement of the drawings that needs to be done manually. I don't see much around that. But let me tell you a little bit from my experience. So I've tried using generative 3D modeling a little bit, and granted, we're pretty early in the process. It took me way longer than if I just would have 3D modeled it myself. Now, if I was in my 20s and just getting started, would I spend as much time learning 3D software as I did back when I was then? Because back then, you were for sure could get a great job if you just knew how to render and do those things. So that I think is a really interesting set of questions. And I would sort of separate it out like, it's valuable probably to still learn CAD. You probably can't build a career to the same degree by just being competent with CAD if you're looking at doing renderings. Renderings are the specific sort of output that I think probably are going to be harder and harder to monetize as a service. But that was already kind of the case even as early as like 5 to 8 years ago. It had nothing to do with technology. It had more to do with sort of overseas render farms competing with design firms here. So when we first got started with our architecture firm, we would do a lot of the renderings in-house. There were some firms that would sort of, you could hire to produce your renderings, but they were really expensive and took a while, and there's a lot of coordination. These days, I get hit up on LinkedIn all the time because it still says like designer and stuff in the bio. And I get hit up by all these overseas rendering firms from every part of the globe being like, we can produce renderings for you for a few $100s. So for a long time, it's not really been a super viable career unless you're in a very specific niche or you have a really loyal clientele that really wants your sort of high-end precision and craftsmanship when it comes to digital visualization. Now, in terms of what types of software should you invest in, I would think of this almost the same way I do financially. If I was to invest in this area with my money, I would probably do a combination of the incumbents, the Adobes and the Autodesk, the biggest people in the industry. They have a long track record of innovating, updating, acquiring smaller companies that are promising and that just have the broadest footprint. So I'd have the majority of my time or money invested in Adobe or Autodesk, the big players. I would be competent with those because they're the most used. And because they also are so well funded and they have that kind of already existing user base, they have the best chance of sort of lasting the longest amount of time because they can afford to keep up with innovation. And they definitely have the brain power and stuff to adapt with the times. You already see this. Both of them have introduced so many different AI plugins and things like that where you can use AI within the precision of their sort of broader software ecosystems. So I wouldn't put all my time and money there. I would take some higher risk investments with both the time and the money on some new things that seem really exciting, that do things that these big companies maybe haven't started to do yet or haven't unveiled yet. But I wouldn't invest all my time or all my money in the high risk stuff that could just not exist in a few years. I have made this mistake. I've invested too much time in my 20s in not the software that was going to be dominant. I invested a lot in this obscure software called FormZ, less so in Maya, which actually still is used, but it's more for sort of 3-form modeling. I probably should have put more time into Rhino and probably the most time into the Autodesk suite, particularly Fusion. So I've made some proportionally bad investments in these things. And the reason why I would say put most of your time towards the biggest players is it's just the least likely for those interfaces to change, or if they do change, for there to be some continuity where you're not all of a sudden having to relearn something. What you don't want to do is spend a ton of time into something that's a little bit cheaper and easier now, but just simply may not exist, right? FormZ isn't really even supported anymore. It hasn't been updated significantly in years. It's way behind schedule. They're never going to catch up. There's no hope in sort of saving them and bringing them up into sort of the contemporary competitive landscape. So most of your time should be invested in the sort of big ones that are the safest. Those companies are also going to consistently lobby and try to make sure that the ecosystem for all the people paying for their software is safe and secure. And so they have a big voice in the industry. So probably your best bet. Now, in terms of AI's capabilities, it's going to be able to do certain parts really well and then still kind of struggle at other ones, right? 3D printers, I think, are another good example. Now, I've just started using 3D printers again recently, and they are so much better. The $600 3D printer I'm using today is 10 times better and faster and more precise than the $1,800 printer I was using 10 years ago. The technology has gotten better, but my intent for what I need to model or create still has to be precise. I still need to be able to control, okay, there needs to be this indentation, and it's not just an approximation. I need it to be exactly 1 inch by 1 inch because there's a piece of wood that's going to fit into this mold for the concrete. If you need specificity and that kind of precision, then you still need to be able to operate that manually. Because if you just have to keep putting in prompts and then hoping, crossing your fingers that the slot machine comes out with 3 cherries and you get the perfect model, you don't really have predictability for your time scope for that particular project. So I like knowing that if I can still try to generate something with the AI, but if it doesn't come out right, I have options to precisely go in and do it by hand. And also 3D modeling, if you're doing simple stuff, not that hard. If you're doing whole buildings, yes, then that becomes a more significant investment of time. But I think the ability to sort of backward edit and make changes and revisions is more than, well, it hasn't made these types of software systems obsolete now, and I doubt that they will be over the next 10 years. All right, overrated, underrated. What do we got?
Let's do it. Seed oil panic.
I don't know. I'm not going to talk about it because I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nutritionist. And I think if you're not, why would you? And this whole kind of thing becomes I was actually listening to some content around something similar where there's the banana in the blueberry smoothie debate, where one lady was sort of saying, oh, well, if you put this banana in your blueberry smoothie, something in the banana counteracts this. And then a whole bunch of other people sort of pointed out, well, the research you're citing actually was only on a handful of people. The scale of what you're talking about doesn't really apply here. And also stop over obsessing on small details that aren't even within the scale of relevance relative to overall health and nutrition. So I find this, where I will talk about it, and we have been in the comment sections for some of my recent posts, is I posted the kind of concrete lamps that we poured inside recycled plastic bottles. Now, one lady sort of pointed out well, concrete is one of the biggest emissions creators in the world. She's right. It is one of the biggest emitters of carbon in the world because it's the most used building material in the world, not because it's disproportionately polluting. And it was kind of reminded me of the banana and the blueberry thing. So I don't want to be like that lady. I don't want to come across as self-righteous, but a little bit on the ignorant side. So that's why I don't really talk about things like seed oils. So I will say that just because you heard a thing doesn't mean that you're ready to kind of evangelize for that, or you're going to kind of look like, someone that kind of shoots from the hip and maybe lacks the critical thinking to sort of take something which is true. Portland cement does create carbon emissions, but not apply a sense of critical thinking, scale, and appropriate use cases to sort of do that. So for example, a glazed ceramic mug is more polluting than a concrete mug of the same size. And it's not even close, it's by a lot more. But glazed ceramics isn't one of the biggest pollutants in the world because it's not nearly used to the same scale. If you look at a concrete slab for even a tool shed, it's a lot more in total mass than a ceramic mug. So I'm careful and it's not even that, I think with any sort of basic level of intelligence, you can make rational assumptions even without expertise. But what you sort of miss is sort of deeper level or sort of tangential things that industry specific people might know. So no opinion on seed oils whatsoever, other than I've used canola oil for lubricating concrete molds, and it seems to work pretty well.
Hanging your own drywall.
Hanging your own drywall is interesting. I think if you just have to do a patch or like 1 or 2 sheets, go for it. But if you're already building a house or going to involve a subcontractor to do that, then I think it's better to let the pros do it. So I will put up the drywall occasionally because it's not hard to cut. It's not hard to screw to a wall if it's just like putting up a few pieces around a detail that I had to change. But what I don't want to do is do a lot of the mudding, taping, and sanding. That I feel like the pros are just so much faster at it that even if they're overcharging me, it's still worth it to have me do it.
Buying technology right as it updates.
Depends. I think if you're in this sort of professional camp, it can make a ton of sense, right? Particularly if the new piece of technology sort of gives you a competitive advantage in your industry. I think if you're a content creator, it often makes sense to get the newest iPhone or whatever you're shooting your vertical content on. It just works, even if it's just a small difference. All of your sort of output for your work is going through this piece of technology. Get it updated. I think I've seen so many designers that were doing quite well, but they didn't want to update their software back in the day when you had to sort of buy the new sort of set. So anytime it can create efficient advantages and you're using it all the time, yes. Now where I think you can be a little more slow and more hesitant is when new technology is coming out that you're currently not using. So upgrades, I'm a big fan of. Completely going after every new piece of technology that comes onto the market that could help you, I think those can be distractions. 3D printers are a great example. I'm glad that I tried 3D printing when it was kind of new, like the hot new thing. And I very quickly said, oh, this is a little too finicky. The error rate is too high. I'm going to put this on hold and come back to it when the machines are a little bit better. I tried it again about 5 or 6 years. It was a lot better, but still not enough to make it really efficient in my workflow. And now that I'm using it, man, it is so much better. And I haven't had any errors yet with doing like 5 or 10 prints, and they've been pretty substantial prints. So that was a great, 3D printing is like a great example of technology that was smart to sort of wait till later before you really sort of spend money and time on it.
Off-grid.
Off-grid makes sense when there is no grid available. Off-grid, when there is a grid there, means you're going to spend a lot on infrastructure that, and you have to size that infrastructure for the worst case scenario, right? So if you're doing an off-grid solar house, you have to put enough solar panels and enough batteries to take advantage or to prepare you for the worst type of weather you're going to have for the year. Now that means, or even maybe over a 5 or 10 year period. So you're designing for the 5-year storm, but you're paying for infrastructure that will then be oversized for your day-to-day use. So being able to use the grid lets you sort of size things efficiently, but it does remove that level of independence. Off-grid is easier to do than ever before, particularly on the electrical side. Off-grid water is becoming more technologically feasible as well if you're in the right environment that has a lot of humidity. So there's things called atmospheric water generators, and they sound really sci-fi and futuristic, but we've all seen an air conditioner in a city, right? Where you're walking down a city street, think about New York, and you feel like a drip of water, and you look up and you see an air conditioner on a fire escape dripping water on you. Well, that's because there's condensation. Condensation causes the humidity to sort of condensate on the cold parts, and then that water drips from that. Atmospheric water generation is just an intentional condensation machine. So if you live in an area that has regular humidity, it can condense that by using electricity through sort of cooling coils, create that condensation, capture the water, and now you can produce off-grid water without having to drill into the ground. Big breakthrough that has been around for a long time, but it's starting to be productized in a really interesting way. So off-grid water is more feasible than it's ever been before without going into the rain catching systems, which have to be sized and all those kind of things. Off-grid electricity is also easier than ever before because the price of solar has come way down. Batteries are better than ever. In fact, the recent sort of partnership I did with Jackery, I think shows this really well. The battery and solar system, I can actually power my welding. So I can off-grid weld now, and I've never been able to do that with any of the previous battery systems I use. I ran the table saw off of this battery. I ran the giant rock saw off of it. So more and more, it's getting easier to go off grid. But if you're doing it for a big primary residence, it still can be pretty cost prohibitive given the amount of infrastructure you have to sort of build in to design around that worst case scenario.
How Long Gone?
Oh, it's one of my favorite podcasts. How Long Gone is one of my podcasts that I listen to on the regular. It's a great show, kind of talks about sort of culture. It's one of those shows I really like because they really focus a lot on issues of taste. I don't really have particularly high regard of my own taste. I just sort of feel like I understand my creativity. I think I'm very good at the creative side, but I'm not that interested in trying to align my interests with what sort of works culturally in that particular moment. There are people I know that they have just these antennas for kind of feeling around them. It's almost like a cultural IQ where they can kind of feel the different trends and always kind of stay ahead of them and see when things are declining and becoming passé or cringe, and always kind of be on the forefront of what's coming next. I've never been that way with music. I have that sort of glimpses of that sometimes with interior design and those things, but mostly my thought is I want to make things that I think are just interesting, period. Not to say they're going to be stylistically eternal or timeless or any of that stuff. More, there's concepts I believe in and I think are cool. Like right now, making things with rocks and logs, awesome. Don't care if it's on trend. Kind of seems like it is. Probably won't be in some time in the future. Don't care. If I'm interested in it, still going to keep making it.
Multitasking.
Depends on the level of seriousness and whether or not something requires focus. So if something doesn't require full focus, then you don't need to give it full focus. If you're mowing the lawn, you can listen to an audiobook while you're doing it. If you're watering the plants or doing bonsai, you can multitask and do multiple things at the same time. Now, I think the question is, if you're always multitasking, that can lead to kind of a degradation of your sort of focus overall. So I do find that if there's days where I'm like, okay, I got a bunch of busy work, I'm just gonna listen to podcasts and audiobooks all day, sort of multitask, take care of a bunch of things, I can still feel kind of mentally fried and exhausted versus if I just did those things quietly. I do think there's some capacity for our attention. So I would say I'm not one of those people that has like a strong opinion. You shouldn't multitask. You should only singularly focus. Do what fits to you, but actually don't lie to yourself about whether or not you're actually giving something the focus that it requires. And also pay attention to whether or not for you as an individual, your attention is a limited resource and you only have so much of it a day to give. Some people can focus in for longer. Other people, they can focus in for small bits and then they get kind of constracted and, fall off a little bit.
Exposed brick.
Exposed brick can be great, especially if it's real brick. So little brick today is what we would consider real load-bearing brick, especially in new construction. It's often just brick panels used as a veneer outside some other framing. So particularly in cities where you'll see like those kind of like 4 to 5 story apartment buildings, and there'll be some like fiber cement boards, some brick. That brick is often just a cladding. Now it still could be made out of real brick. It's not like a fake, totally fake veneer, although that exists too. But it's not like the building is actually structural brick. But I love old brick buildings. New brick buildings, not so sure.
DIYing your own shed.
So DIYing like a tool shed, if you just need like a backyard tool shed and you're not really sort of super experienced, there's some pretty good deals with like Tough Shed, which we've done work with in the past. And I bet you there's even some ones on Amazon you can get. They're probably going to be a little bit more expensive than what you could do on your own. But if you don't have the tools, it might make sense. If you're someone that's already DIY stuff and has like, put it this way, if you have a compound miter saw, you should probably build it yourself, right? That's where I'd say you already have a tool that's like set up to do all those cuts. If you just have a jigsaw and a circular saw, maybe you should think about it, right? You might be sort of on the in-between, but it's very doable. You just got to really think about the foundation and do a foundation system that's right for your climate.
Putting you on the spot with health shit. Protein powder.
Protein powder is interesting, and I haven't really ever heard like a good reason for it for people that are not so time constrained, meaning that you literally don't have time to eat. or people that are professional bodybuilders. For everyone else, I don't really get it. So it's not something I'm interested in. I feel like there's so many types of protein that I like eating. Like I like eggs. I could always just eat another piece of chicken. I feel like all those things taste better and are a better culinary experience. Now, I totally get it when construction mode is really kicking in and you got to get up at 6 a.m. and be on the site first thing every morning, nonstop days, and you got to get some sustenance in. Protein shake could make some sense to supplement in some other stuff, particularly when it comes and you're in a location where your lunch option is burgers, pizza, or stuff like that, or fast food. So I guess that there's, kind of convenience and speed factors, which also makes sense if you're like an astronaut or something. But if you're, put this way, I don't think I would ever make a protein shake if I was at home, particularly in a blender, which is like a pain to clean. I think I'd probably even eat some like canned fish or something like that first for something convenient, or a can of lentils or something like that. It's probably gonna be a little bit easier.
Okay, last one, Chris Nolan.
Oh yeah, everyone's talking about the Odyssey. Haven't seen it yet. I kind of think of him as, I've never seen a bad movie of his. Everyone's been enjoyable. I'm not really that into the format of film. Like I just think 2 to 3 hours is just a lot to be sitting and passively consuming something. So I think if I was sitting and consuming something, I'd rather it be live music, and I'm not even that big of a live music person, or like a sporting event or something like that where there's actual, it's happening in real time. But I'm just not that interested in traveling for recorded media. I guess IMAX and those things kind of, maybe they make the exception, but the argument of bigger screen, so you got to put it on your schedule, I don't know, don't get it. All right, thanks for watching Make a Ranch. Put your sort of questions and topic suggestions down in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Bye.